And so I realized I no longer had the reasoning powers that I needed to come up with a formula. So by Sunday I thought, well, maybe I better call Tom and tell him I can't do this. And but then I thought, well, by going into the world of poetry, I did come up with some new powers that I hadn't had before. And my father was a minister. I guess I haven't told you this. And my mother said he used to stop his sermons in the middle because us kids were always goofing around in the front row. And he'd tell us to shut up. And in high school, I inadvertently became the class clown. I was always interrupting class. And even today, if I'm sitting in a forum like this, or in a lecture or a play or something, and it's too serious for me, I want to stand up and shout and take off my shirt and grab the center of attention. So I thought, well, maybe I can put this to use. And so what I did, I said, maybe I can actually channel and call up Albert Einstein. You know, Einstein gave us this formula, and I thought, well, maybe I can contact him wherever he is. And so I went out in the backyard, and this was at night, and the comet was up there, you know, really beautiful. And the thing about the comet, I don't know if you realized, it comes every 2,400 years. So 2,400 years ago, think. Lao Tzu, Confucius, Zoroaster, the age of Pericles, which means Sophocles and all these people were alive the last time this comet went through. And so I went out in the backyard, and I thought, well, I'll see if I can get Albert's attention, because he likes to play the fiddle. He probably knew that Albert Einstein was a fiddler. And so I went out in the backyard, and I just blew a few notes. And I went up, and I looked at the sky, and I said, Albert, we really need your help. It's the end of the century, and we don't know what we're doing. We have all this freedom, all this power, and we're not using it. And by that I mean, why does almost everybody I know not doing what they really want to do? David Brower said the other night in a lecture that in the last 50 years, we have used up more resources and more energy than mankind did in all previous history. In other words, in 50 years, we've used up more energy than mankind did in 3 million years. So here we are. We're the recipients. We're the rich ones. All the power is coming to us. And so anyway, I go back. I said, Albert, and all of a sudden, you aren't going to believe this. I didn't believe it either at first. But I saw Albert sitting up on a cloud and was playing his violin. And he was playing the violin with a guy at the piano. And I couldn't see the guy at the piano's face. But I said, Albert! And he kind of looked over. You know, he's in the middle of a rehearsal, and he didn't want to pay attention to me. But I said, look, we got all this trouble, and we need a new formula. And I have these ideas, but I really can't do it. And he sort of said, well, you know, he gave that kind of look. He didn't really say much, did he? All he said was 3 things. He said, circle, well, actually 4, I guess. Circle plus the grid equals, and this one's the one that just totally threw me, the waffle. And I said, come on, you're going to have me get up in front of people and tell them that, you know, the circle plus the grid equals the waffle. I mean, that's not anything like E equals MC squared. So he just said, well, it's tough. And I said, well, come on, explain it to me. He said, well, I'll send you a message, I'll send you the information. I have to get back to rehearsing. And at that moment, the guy at the piano turned around, and it was Sigmund Freud. He was playing the piano, he had a cigar, and he said, this thing, sometimes a cigar is just a cigar. And it turns out today is Sigmund Freud's birthday, if you didn't know, and I'm sure that's why he was there. And they were practicing Beethoven's Kreutzer Sonata, which they were about to do in concert. What did I ask Freud? Oh, I just asked Freud, what is the answer? And he said, love is God. I said, a lot of people won't like that. Love is God? We tried that in the 60s, and, that made a mess of everything. He said, I'm sorry. Love is God, and the people who want power aren't going to like that saying. So anyway, I thought, oh, this is useless. These guys, they're just putting me on, right? I mean, it's just stupid. So I went back in the house, and I just gave up, and I said, okay, goodbye. I went in the house, and what the hell, my fax machine was going like crazy. And what it did was it printed out all these instructions for the, to explain the formula, and gave me a lot of ideas. And so this is my interpretation, really, of the messages that Einstein sent me in my fax machine from heaven. Okay, first is the circle. And as we all know, the circle, you can stand for many, many things. And I'll give you a few things he said. It stands for the earth, stands for cycles, the seasons, birth, death, rebirth, family circle, circle of friends, worker circle. And I remember the first time I went to Mexico in 1960, I was amazed that the workers in the field in Mexico, on their lunch hour, would all sit in a circle and talk to each other. And you never see that with workers here. They all split up into individuals. Tribe and council circles, and power sharing. So, as you know, when you work in a circle, it's a very different system. And then we'll get into the grid in a minute. It's a very different system of doing things. And if you've read very much about, American Indians or whatever, the council circles and how things worked in their circles. Eternity, the Chinese symbol for eternity is the circle, probably those jade circles you've seen. Completeness, circle dances. You'll like any of your folk dancers, you have a lot of circle dances. The sun, the moon, stars turning, circle of the horizon, stones and tree trunks, eyes, round houses, the mother's breast. And I'll come back to the mother's breast again. But he also sent me a couple of short quotes on circles. And this is from Emerson on circles. And it's listed in your reading list. It says, Emerson at the beginning says, the eye is the first circle. The horizon which forms it is the second. And throughout nature, this primary figure is repeated without end. It is the highest emblem in the cipher of the world. St. Augustine described the nature of God as a circle whose center was everywhere and its circumference nowhere. Okay, I want to read you then another one he sent me, and this is on your reading list too, from Black Elk Speaks. Now, Black Elk Speaks was the narrative of an American Indian medicine man that was very popular in the 60s. And if you want to understand a lot of what was going on in the 60s, I recommend this book. Okay, there's a quote here on circles. You have noticed that everything an Indian does is in a circle, and that is because the power of the world always works in circles, and everything tries to be round. In the old days when we were a strong and happy people, all our power came to us from the sacred hoop of the nation, and so long as the hoop was unbroken, people flourished. The flowering tree was the living center of the hoop, and the circle of the four quarters nourished it. Even the seasons form a great circle in their changing and always come back again to where they were. The life of a man is a circle from childhood to childhood, and so it is in everything where power moves. Our teepees were round like the nests of birds, and these were always set in a circle. The nation's hoop, a nest of many nests, where the Great Spirit meant for us to hatch our children. Okay, the next one I'm going to read you leads into then the grid. And what Black Elk Speaks, and I think this is very telling. So he says they lived in circles, but the white people, the Wasichus he calls them, the white people have put us in these square boxes. Okay. These square boxes. Our power is gone and we are dying, for the power is not in us anymore. You can look at our boys and see how it is with us. When we were living by the power of the circle in the way we should, boys were men at 12 or 13 years of age. But now it takes them very much longer to mature. And we're going to talk about maturity then as we go into the grid. Now, one thing else they put on here was 1650. And starting, that's also the first date here on the world population, 1650. And it's implied from what Albert said is the world started changing radically around 1650. Now, the reason was, let's see, okay, the growth of absolute monarchy and the classification of knowledge. And you can read Foucault on a lot of this stuff. He's a French philosopher, modern. A couple of his books are listed there. He writes a lot about power in sexuality, power in prisons, power in clinics, hospitals, all kinds of things. So with the absolute monarchy and the classification of knowledge, everything started laying out in squares. Now, it's interesting, in that talk on the Good Samaritan a couple of weeks ago, he talked about bureaucratizing the Good Samaritan. And he gave the example of a refugee camp. And when he first got there, thousands of people, and they were all in bad shape. He showed it a couple of months later, and they had all been laid out on a grid, so supplies could get through on the grid. Now, so this grid pattern started around 1650, and it has totally taken over the world. Okay, our whole world is laid now out in grids. There are power grids for electricity. All our maps have grids on them. And this could actually be, I guess, a picture of the world, with your projection, latitude, longitude. This also, I worked at the fire lookout, and the map on my firefinder is round. But it looks like this because you have town, range, ship, and section. And when I pick up a fire, I have to try and tell them which square it's in. So maps, all the maps have grids on them that you will look at. Okay, report cards, timetables. Let's see. All our games are played, or a lot of our games are played on grids. So you have the gridiron, for football, chess, checkers, backgammon, basketball, soccer, and you could go on and on. The grid is all pervasive, I guarantee you. And we live in square houses, and if you look at all these tribes in old times, there are a lot of grass, round houses, round huts. Let's see. And then square dances came in, the foxtrot's square, blueprints are square, and cemeteries. Where you're going to be buried is probably going to be on a grid. So you're going to live your whole life, and this is where I'm going to get into the university, because the most important, the whole world looks like this room. And this room is the model for the whole world. We're all sitting in grids. I'm up here talking, but what's up there? Grids. The basic elements are laid out in grids. Our whole world. And what this means then, there's a lot of consequences, but I also want to put the internet. The internet is a net that goes around the world. It's another net. So now, some implications of this. So what you have is you have this circular world, the sense of completeness, of tribe, of family, and it's being taken over by the grid and turned into a waffle. Now, the grid makes things very efficient, and that's, I want to say, and on this note, I had an anthropology professor at San Francisco State who said we live better than any kings in history before 1900. So think about that. You can fly all over the world, you got flush toilets, you have a microwave, these are all things no king before 1900 had that. Every one of us in this room lives better than any king in history before 1900. And it's really due to the grid, because goods and services have been very fast on this. And it breaks down knowledge into very small parts, so you can really examine small parts, and that's how we've gotten a lot of our power, is by getting down in smaller parts. Now, so these are the real positive aspects of the grid. Well, now let's talk about some of the negative aspects. One is the grid creates a lot of borders. And number one, I would say, is borders between knowledge. And as Tom said, I've gone to a lot of classes in the last 15 years in different departments at the university. And what amazes me is one department has no idea what another department is doing. The theater department has no knowledge of the biology department. The communications department has no knowledge of the art department. I go to a lot of events, and most of you go, it all takes place in little narrow spots. And each discipline has its own language. They all speak English, but each one has developed a kind of language like lawyers. So you can talk about anthropology, and it's anthropologists talking, or you can talk about biology. They each have their own language, and it's made out of English. But George Orwell would say it's a lot of it's like doublespeak. It's a lot like law English. So it's a kind of Tower of Babel. The grid holds it together. We're all here together. And another thing I should say is in college, what you learn as far as power goes is you learn how to manage large parts of the grid. And that's what you're going to get paid for when you get out of here from college. Why are you going to make, a fifth, you're going to make $20,000 more than somebody who didn't go to college? Well, it's because you've really learned how to manage this grid. GE classes count just as much in a way, because at least you've gone in different departments. But so that's another positive thing. You get a lot of power through the grid. Another thing I should say that 1650 encyclopedias came along, dictionaries. Before 1650 or so, actually a little later, you could spell trash any way you wanted to. You could spell TRASSSH or whatever. But they became codified. And you got dictionaries, and there was only one way to spell a word. Well, again, this is efficient, because then everybody in the English-speaking world spells the word the same way. Okay, let's talk about some of the negative aspects. I've tried to make this positive so far. But what I would say, just in terms of the waffle, is that when you lay a grid over the wholeness of nature, and you control it, and you break up nature, you create a tremendous tension. And I'd say one of the main things about living on the waffle, and this is all of it, this is the whole world. We're living with tension within us, and we're living with tension around us. Now, for instance, that talk last week, the argument between the Israeli person supporting Israel and the person supporting the Arab, was really a talk between this and this. In other words, the Arab world lives by family. And all your power and the way you live comes through your family. It does not come through joining the Bank of America as an accountant clerk or whatever. This is a God-centered world. And again, that's the Arab world. Okay, this is the Israeli world, which is like the European and the American and Japanese. And what I'll say, again, it's efficient. And what counts here is merit. You have to work your way up the ladder. Not always merit, but you really have to show something. If you're going to become a fighter pilot in this system, you have to be able to fly a plane. Okay? If you become a fighter pilot in this system, you have to be Saddam Hussein's brother-in-law. And so I think this is really the reason that Israel has been able to hold up against the Arab world, even though the Arab world is much bigger. It's because they live by this efficient merit system. Here, family favoritism and family control means that competence is not the rule. And also you can divide, families are always fighting with each other, this kind of thing. Okay, I'm trying to keep this in some international scope here so that you can see this has an effect on all of us. Okay, now one thing about this, when you read Black Elk Speaks, it is this destroying this. Okay, this is European civilization, technological civilization, coming in and destroying the tribal worldview, the tribal unit. So if you read Black Elk Speaks, you will see this in play. How the grid mentality. There are other things about the grid. This is the sacred world, as I said. This is the world, a God-centered world. This is a sacred world. This is secular. And so what that means is that there's less sentimentality, for instance. There's less attachment to these things. I called a friend the other day who's a lawyer in Palo Alto, and he said it is cutthroat. You wonder why the economy is booming. It's because these companies are cutthroating inside the company as well as out. He's worked for this company as a lawyer. It's a huge computer firm for 3 years. He has no friends in those 3 years. He said that it's everybody's competing with everybody else. You're very expendable in this system. And so I'd say that's another drawback of this system is you are very expendable in this system. In this system, you will be taken care of, hopefully, by your family. The drawback of this system is you have to conform much more. And this is where the question of freedom comes in. We have much more freedom on the grid because we can make our own choices. We can move any way we want. But in this system, for instance, the Arab family is totally controlled by the father. And everybody in that family, as Cher was telling me the other day, she had some Arab tenants in an apartment, and the father was the law, the absolute control. So in a way, this seems very appealing. This is wholeness. This is getting back to your roots in nature, but it really does take away your freedom. My question is, why, when we have all this freedom, do we find it hard to use it in our personal lives? But I would also say, on an international or national level as well, we have all these capabilities, but why are they colliding with each other? Both inside us, so we can't do what we want, internationally, so that people can't get together. Okay, another thing about laying a grid over the world is some people are trapped within borders. So you have the Hutu and the Tutsi trapped in the same square. You've laid a grid over the world, and they're trapped in there, and they're fighting for power. And it's like they didn't want to be together in that square. And now they want to control the square and kick everybody else out of it so they can have the square all to themselves. Let's see, it also excludes people. So in this system, if you're part of the family, you're part of the family. This could be the mafia or whatever. You're part of the family. But in this system, you're pretty much on your own. And our whole system is set up for children to go out on their own at around 22, if not sooner. And so you are out there by yourself running on these squares. Well, I want to read you a little thing from Alice Through the Looking Glass. And you probably all know the famous scene where she's on the checkerboard with I think it's the Red Queen. And, so Alice has gone through the looking glass, and she's in this whole country looks like a checkerboard. For some minutes, Alice stood without speaking, looking out in all directions over the country. And a most curious country it was. There were a number of tiny little brooks running straight across it from side to side. And the ground between was divided up into squares by a number of little green hedges that reached from brook to brook. And I could have read you some other things from, the strict poetry from Lewis Carroll, like Jabberwocky and stuff. But I thought, just to get the poetry in here. But this is really like a poem. I declare it's marked out just like a large chessboard, Alice said at last. There ought to be some men moving about somewhere, and so there are. She added in a tone of delight. She glanced rather shyly at the real queen as she said this. Oh, I would like to be a queen. She wants to make it on this chessboard to be a queen, and she's only in the second. And says, I wouldn't mind being a pawn if only I might join, though of course I should like to be a queen best. She glanced rather shyly at the real queen as she said this, but her companion only smiled pleasantly and said, That's easily managed. You can be the white queen's pawn, if you like, as Lily's too young to play, and you're in the second square to begin with. When you get to the 8th square, you'll be a queen. So she's down here, she's going to go up there, she's going to be a queen. Okay? And I'd say that that's what people in the Bay Area are trying to do. They're trying to get up there and be the queen. So Alice never could, let's see. Just at this moment, somehow or other, they began to run. And a lot of you, when you graduate, all of a sudden you're going to find yourself running, and you won't know how it started. Well, this is how it started. Let's see. Alice never could quite make it out in thinking it over afterwards how it was that they began. All she remembers is that they were running hand in hand, and the queen went so fast that it was all she could do to keep up with her. And still the queen kept crying, faster, faster. But Alice felt she could not go faster, though she had no breath left to say so. Now, now, cried the queen, faster, faster. And they went so fast that at last they seemed to skim through the air, hardly touching the ground with their feet, till suddenly, just as Alice was getting quite exhausted, they stopped, and she found herself sitting on the ground, breathless and giddy. The queen propped her up against a tree and said kindly, You may rest a little now. Alice looked around her in great surprise. Well, I do believe we've been under this tree the whole time. Everything's just as it was. Of course it is, said the queen. What would you have it? Well, in our country, said Alice, still panting a little, you'd generally get somewhere else if you ran very fast for a long time as we've been doing. A slow sort of country, said the queen. Now here, you see, it takes all the running you can do to keep in the same place. If you want to get somewhere else, you must run at least twice as fast as that. So in another way, I want to put another way. This is the world of tribe and nature, but this is the world of bureaucracy. And this is the model, and this is the world we live in. I've worked in bureaucracies my whole life. My father was a Methodist minister, and then he went in the Army as a chaplain. I went through universities, then I worked for the Forest Service. I worked for the Forest Service for 34 years now. I also worked at UC Santa Cruz. And so this is the world of the grid and the bureaucracy. And this is the ladder you're trying to climb up. Again, but you're expendable. Okay, what's the real effect of the square? A couple unusual ones that Albert Einstein told me about, and you might think about. One of them is that he redefined his formula. He said it really stands for the environment equals man crucifying nature squared. And so what you have is you have man crucifying nature squared. So that's what EF equals MC squared stands for. And you heard it today here for the first time. And you'll be able to tell your grandchildren that you really found out so it's environment equals man crucifying nature squared. And nature counts for nothing in this system. Remember that. In this one, again, as we said, the circle is the natural form of the world in nature. But in this world, nature is only a resource. Nature is not sacred. You can do anything with nature you want. You can cut down the sacred forest. You can plow up the sacred boulders. You can do anything you want. And I will tell you that in 35 years working in the Sierras, that's what's happening. And I've also put on a national scale again. I've lived in Greece, Germany, England, traveled in about 35 countries. I went back to Greece for the first time in 20 years, about 5 years ago. And Greece is so polluted compared to what it was in 1965, especially Athens. It was hard to breathe in Athens. You wake up at night and it would really hurt. So I would say this system is really tearing nature apart. Okay. The other thing is, that in terms of our personal lives, I would also say that it's crucifying each one of us, and I'll explain how it seems to be happening. Now, what it is that we are being impaled to some degree by one of these crosses. And what it is if you can think, when you go home and go to bed tonight, just feel two things. One is feel how your right side and your left side are totally different in feeling. And usually your right side, whichever hand, right or left, if you're right-handed or you're left-handed, that side will be incredibly tense compared to the other side of your body. Okay, that's the downward split this way. The other split is across this way. And I noticed in my own life that I use food a lot to hold down my feelings. And if you've ever had any body therapy with body workers and stuff, they're always working and trying to get your feelings to come up here from down here. And so we're split this way. And so that's the crucifixion across this way. Okay, let's see. Well, there are other things I had, and I really thought about Piaget's saying in here, hell is the human will frozen in eternal denial. And to exist in this system, I would say that we have to deny the demands of our body. And the whole thing is that we are actually somehow not animals, but we are machines. And the other thing is that the change now is our model of the perfect human being is a machine. And we put that on ourselves. So we will drive ourselves relentlessly in order to keep up on the grid. And we compare ourselves to machines. And I would say the thing that most takes away our freedom in terms of the waffle is self-loathing. And somebody said that no Americans like their bodies. And in order to work as hard as we have to keep up with this, we really have to deny our bodies and work like machines. But somebody said almost none of us like our noses, for instance. Our noses are misshapen. We look in the mirror, we hate our nose. But that's not the only thing. We hate our breasts, we hate our hands, we hate our feet. There's something in us that we hate. And I would say that that's one of the things that is this self-hatred and self-loathing is one of the reasons we can't use the freedom we have. Okay, well, in the world, one way people get along on the grid is with Prozac. Let's see, there are two more. There are actually two more. I didn't know about Zoloft and Paxil. And these are called the Three Sisters. So this is how many of us are functioning. I always thought that, people are going to go on 1,000-year spaceship journeys. They're going to have a lot of drugs to make it possible to live in a spaceship. And this is what Alice meant up here. If you think about it, when I go to Manhattan, I like Manhattan a lot, but I walk around and there are thousands of people living in this apartment house. And there are thousands of people living in that one. And these are just like spaceships. And if you think about it, most people get in their car, they go to work, and the only time they're outdoors is between that car and the office. And then they get back in, they drive home, and so they're really not living on the earth anymore. They're already living in outer space. I would also say that's true in terms of the imagination, that we live in a world of abstraction. And so that most of us have already taken off from this planet. We're out there somewhere else. Okay, well, I'm going to, so for the last few minutes here, I just want to read some poems of my own and also give you some ideas that Albert Einstein gave me and some I've had myself. Now, the one thing we all die of, or most people die of these days, and I had a friend who died on Valentine's Day of this very thing, and this is what most of us die of: impatience. And it literally can kill you. He was too impatient to stay at home and wait for the ambulance. He got in his car and tried to drive to the hospital and died on the way to the hospital. So most of us, and if you think about it, but impatience is built into the system. You're running like Alice on this thing to keep up. You can't bear. Today when I was walking downtown, I came out of the park, and this woman came. It's a 4th and Cypress. And she started coming toward me, and she stopped so that I could cross the street. But she blocked off this other guy who was probably in his 60s, bald-headed. And I saw that other guy go, damn! And so that's the kind of thing that is really affecting all of us again. So what I want to say is, of course, that most of the things I have to say are to getting back to patience. Albert said I should tell you about some of my personal ways, too, of keeping off the grid. And, okay, I'm not a role model. I'm still tied to my mother. I mean, there are all kinds of things. But there are a few things. I've never had a credit card. And if you pay cash, you're living in a different world. You can go a lot further with the money you have if you don't have credit cards. It's very hard to buy a house, which I've never done. A friend of mine said a choice in life is between buying a house and going on a trip. And I've always gone on a trip. My cars are all 10 years old. But the other thing I want to tell you is watching television. If you don't watch television, you're going to have a whole new life. Because the amount of time you're watching television, so that you can start doing something else. And so if you've got 3 hours a day to do something else, that also can change your life. Now this whole world, and I say, I really think that if you look at the university as the model of the world, is based on logic. And what you can do to renew your life is go back to pre-logic. Every one of us here was a poet up till 5 years of age. In other words, until you went to the first grade, you were a poet. And you used language like a poet. And you thought like a poet, and hopefully some of your parents wrote down things that you said. And you'd be amazed how much imagery, poetic imagery you have. There are lots of other things that I was going to say, but I'll just say one of his dreams. I always try to write down my dreams, because I don't want to lose that part of my life that I'm living at night. And at night you're living you've got 8 hours. But I don't want to feel like I'm doing nothing. So I like to write down my dreams, and it's just fun to write down your dreams to feel that you have this whole other non-logical life. Another thing is travel. And I recommend, it was really neat when the people came into the forum and talked about traveling. And one thing I didn't mention, as far as this crucifixion, is grades. And one thing in the International Forum that I thought was very interesting was when the two women from Sweden talked about grading in their school. I don't know if you remember, but what they said is they have pass with excellence, pass, no pass. That is going to create a different kind of culture than if you have A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and you're breaking people and you're making everybody in the room compete with each other on this micro level. And that's what we've come down to, is this micro competition. So great. So a lot of what I'm thinking about has to do with becoming childlike again. Has to do with play, simplicity, laughter, meditation. In terms of, and that's the personal stuff. In terms of international, this whole thing right here depends on oil. There's one thing our whole world depends on right now is oil. If oil goes, the whole thing, our whole life collapses. And so I think what I would like to see is solar power. That one thing about solar power is you can have it in your home. There are already millions of people off the grid, off the power grid, with their solar power. And I would like to see that. I think ultimately that would give us all a lot more options and a lot more freedom. But on a personal level, one is travel. As I was going to recommend travel. When you travel, there's several things. One is you take your life in your own hands again. You take control of your life. You have to find a bed. You have to catch the train. And there's a lot of satisfaction in this. The other thing is you see the world with the eyes of a child again. Everything is new. You go to a country like Indonesia from Chico and you've never been out of the country, I guarantee you this is going to hit you like childhood or like a bad dream. I mean, I hit Jakarta, it's like a bad dream. But the point is that it brings you alive again in the pre-logical world. And what is driving us all crazy is trying to be logical all the time. Constant. We need those breaks. We need those rests. And as I say, if you don't get sleep and dream, you go crazy. You literally go crazy if you don't sleep. Probably for more than a week, and you're over the moon. Okay, well, one thing I do is write poetry. And this is one way of trying to go back to being like a child. And let me just read 2 or 3. We're coming to the end. So I wrote I always wanted to write a collection of poems about things. And I could never figure out, how could I write about a ruler. By the way, Albert Einstein told me this is science. He left this for me in the house. And he said, science is what can be measured. And that's all you need to know as a definition of science. And anything that cannot be measured by a ruler is discounted in the world of science. So, good thing to, very simple. Albert also said he would give me a sign that he was here today with us if he were listening in and he approved. And so I'm looking for a sign. That's why I'm looking around the room. But we'll see if he answered that. Okay, this one's called Shoes. So I wrote a prayer to my shoes. Ah, my shoes, do not lead me into wicked ways, the path of danger. Guide my feet into fields of flowers, to the steps of lovers, to moonlit nights in distant countries. Warn me of thieves. Run before I even realize I should run. And when you're propped up on a desk, bring me pleasant memories. Dear shoes, you've gone with me into embarrassing situations. And as far as I know, so far you've told no one. Man's best friend, a woman's insurance. And when I find you full of holes, I don't simply throw you away. I bless the stigmata of my travels, my conversations with whaling captains and angels, my visions on mountains of the sea so far away. I take you reverently and sadly to the trash can, and I ask you to forgive this rash act as I drop and forget you, as I turn to new souls who will accompany me through the dark, who hopefully know they are you being joyfully reborn. Okay, here's one about hands. So this is a prayer to my hands. It says, hands, you don't understand, but you act. You contain more truth in my heart, more compassion than my head. When I let you have your own way, you rescue children fallen into rivers. You make beanbags and music. You take the hands of other people, crushing them into your crude embrace. You know you want to love and be loved. Hands, though I've tried to tame you, calm you, read 1,000 self-help manuals, ransacked history, stood on street corners shouting slogans, you have escaped me. You have felt hot foreheads, not fearing disease. You've touched the eyes of the blind, caressed the sores of lepers, never losing your wonder. When I would escape you, leave you behind, you came running after, carrying telephone bills and requests for compassion. You've learned the world only too well, and you would teach me the infinite if only I would let you have your way, if only I would leave you alone. Let's see. Here's one to a computer, here's one to a washing machine, here's one to a comb, here's one to a light bulb. Here's one to television. We live with marvels and miracles, and the most marvelous of all takes us to the land of dreams. Dear TV, I have kneeled before you night after night, praying for understanding, asking for absolution. Deliver me from the tears of those in catastrophe, those you bring into my living room wailing and weeping over a falling body, a burnt building, eyes wild with the sirens sweeping up the street. Take away the multitudes fleeing before false governments, raising barricades, pleading for help and peace. In the miracle of your hypnotic glance, I lose myself in another pre-digested life. I turn from terror to hope, from confusion to the sure aid of aspirin and antacids, to beautiful bodies draped across magnificent machines. I know that if only I had enough money, I can escape from anything, even from you. Here's the automobile. Let me just read you one last one, I think, at the very end here. And again, as I say, that somehow we need to... and efficiency, I forgot to mention this. The population of the world since 1650, 1996, is 10 times. So that I would say that the grid has really been responsible for growth of world population. So the growth of the world is now 10 times what it was in 1650. I'll answer your question when I get back, okay? You probably, Jack. I don't know, my text may be all screwed up. In the end, what it comes to is a cup of tea, properly drunk. A cup with a chipped lip, a pastoral scene. The great god Pan pursuing a nymph and playing his pipes. The tea smells of the fields. The cup brings what we've forgotten, nature naked as the day it was born. Pan pursues. The nymph smiles over her shoulder. The grass asks for nothing more than the form of lovers recreating the world. The tea brings a slight buzz to the brain. The visions begin. The table takes wing. Anything can happen. That's the promise we need. We drain the cup, even as it brims and runs over. I just noticed something here. We have a communique from Albert Einstein. These were blank pages, and all of a sudden they appeared as another handout. And so I guess we'll just hand it out. I haven't had a chance to check it myself, but here you go. And I'm glad to entertain any questions. And here, what you got? So So I think that's basically what I have to say as a view of the world. And so anyway, what was your question?
Are you saying that the grid and libraries didn't exist until 1650?
No, but the internet did not. The internet was created by university libraries combining with each other. And actually, I should go back to probably the birth of the university around the 12th century.
Well, this Roman camp,
Uh-huh.
Roman camp was set up in the grid, and before that, the Mile and Chico,
Uh-huh.
that was set up in the grid. And there was a library in Alexandria in Egypt.
Oh, well, that's interesting because that speaks for empire. They didn't take over the whole world with their grid, but they had empires that were very large. And what happened to the Roman Empire and the Mayans? They're gone. But that's a good point. Thank you. Appreciate that. Anybody else? Yeah.
Which one has the greater number of suicides?
Greater number of suicides. Well, my mother, who actually is not an anthropologist, but she studied a lot of, she's a psychiatric social worker. And she said that she thought probably the amount of suicides has stayed the same. Because I've read things, I remember reading an account of the Hopi Indians. And the problem is that, for instance, with lovers, if they're born into the same group, they can't marry. And so then you'll have despair and suicide. My feeling about this is that, again, you have more freedom because you can choose the group you want to belong to. All these things are nice in a sense of wholeness, and we need that. But the point is you're really trapped in your group. I think the great thing, and that's what I would like people to take advantage of, freedom, is to join the group that really fits them as a person. And you know, we have all kinds of different unions. Now, Freud, going to say it's his birthday today, said he thought the main desire of individual people was to be a member of a small group. And so that will give you in a circle of friends is very important. And the people I know who seem to get along and really feel most protected in life have a good circle of friends. So in terms of suicide, I just don't know. I just know that's what my mother said, that when she was studying, I think at San Francisco State, that the percentage of suicide seems to stay pretty much the same. Another one? Question? Oh, go ahead.
Breaking college class.
Oh, go ahead, please. Yeah.
A good example that you cited in your past.
Uh-huh. Oh, of what?
Of raging college class, talking.
Oh, I used to sit in history class, and we had this real short little history teacher in high school. And I'd just sit there, and I'd start pretending I was watching a bug going across the ceiling like this, and everybody's attention would go to me. And off the professor, and he had a hell of a time getting the attention back. If you've done any theater, then the thing you want to know is you do not want to compete with kids and dogs, because they show that your acting is phony. And so I assume that what I would do is, kid stuff like that. Now, actually, we moved from Washington State to California when I was in the fourth grade. After the fourth grade, the fifth grade in California, we were using exactly the same books that we had used in the fourth grade in Washington. So I was really bored, and I saw it too. And so I got in a lot of trouble at that one, and I had a falling out with a friend. I said, okay, we're going to have a gang war, and we're going to have it over in the field next to the school. And the principal, and I don't know, the teacher heard about this. We all got, in those days, we got corporal punishment. We got paddled with this big paddle with holes in it, plywood, in front of the whole class. And then they gave me a bunch of tests, and they said, okay, IQ-wise, I thought you should be in the sixth grade. And so they jumped me ahead a year. And I can tell you that I went from being, the smartest in the class to being the sort of stumblebone. And it was very humiliating. That was that sixth grade. It was the first male teacher I'd ever had. But I don't think that hell-raising thing has really disappeared. I still want to give up and disrupt my father's sermon. I think that's still there. Yeah.
I disagree with you saying that poetry is dying at age 5.
Oh, well, I say that. Okay. No, I didn't say not necessarily, but the thing about it is that we all have to work so logically all the way through school that to suspend that logic, we do in our dreams every night, but that we're, in a sense, slaves to logic. I don't think it dies if you cultivate it. And that's the point I'm making, is that one thing I said in the last lecture, I think the best thing any of us can do as a companion for the rest of our life is find a book of poetry, either an anthology or a poet you particularly like, and keep that in your pocket for the rest of your life. My main concern, I must confess, is that we be able to have good lives no matter what the system is, no matter what happens in our lives. You know, whether there's an earthquake, whether there's a war, whether this whole thing falls apart, we each need something to steady us no matter what. My particular thing is poetry. And this century has been wonderful for translations from all over the world. I mean, we now have translations of poets from every ethnic group, every poet in Sweden, South Africa, whatever. So you can find somebody who really appeals to you. And I had a friend, I said this the other day, who comes down a couple times a week to go to law school. And she was having insomnia. And I said, well, what you need is you need a poet to read when you can't go to sleep at night. And so I gave her some books, and we went through a bunch, and she finally came up with a Russian poetess. Out of the things I gave her, Anna Akhmatova from Russia. And so a poet, and a friend said after the last lecture, who's a poet, he said, well, what you were saying is that the poet is the lover who can't desert you. And so that you always have that as a companion. And that would be my thing in general, no matter how much you get caught up in the grid, if you have ways to slow yourself down and to really interrupt your own impatience. Poetry is one of the best ways. It's very concentrated. I'll just tell you when I got interested in poetry was at Berkeley, and I had a class called Modes of Writing. And I decided I'd write a paper on poetry. I was like 1920. And I picked the hardest poets possible, I mean, in a way. T.S. Eliot, Wallace Stevens, and E. Cummings. And what it was is I did not understand them. I got these books, and it was like I was reading another language. I did not understand what they were talking about. And this is what everybody, my brother complains about my poetry. People are always saying poetry can't be understood, that everybody's writing in this real arcane way. So what I did for 6 months was I read all kinds of books about poetry. I read poetry. And I realized at the end, what helped me the most is poets usually talk about very few subjects. One is love, the other is freedom, another is death. And almost all the poems you ever read will have to do with those three subjects. So it took some learning. But a lot of this translation from other languages now that you can get is very simple and real straightforward. And if you want to get into the more complicated, the more philosophical, the more historical and complex, you can. And you go into that. But there's a tremendous amount of poetry available now. And the thing about poetry is it takes you out of the logical way of doing it. It makes jumps. And it interrupts your logical way of thinking, and it takes you into another mode of being, and another mode of thinking, and it slows you down. This is the primary thing that poetry does. If you just let it, it will slow you down. Okay, any more questions? Okay, well, I think our time's up. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Thank you for coming.
I know Wayne isn't going to escape quickly.
Oh, I'll be here, yes.
How do you recall your dreams?
Huh?
How do you recall your dreams?
Okay, one thing is, when I'm having a dream, I try to remember one word that sums up the dream, because otherwise they'll just escape. If I can remember that one word, lots of times I'll wake up and get to go to the bathroom or something, I'll write down that one word. And sometimes I can't read it because I'm doing it in the dark. But usually that one word will bring the dreams back. And usually, the most I can remember maybe 3 in a row. And then what I do is first thing in the morning I write them down.
Actually, the other thing I was going to ask you, you don't think that a lot of the magic is lost in the translation of poetry?
You know, it's funny, in a way that yes and in a way no. The main thing about poets from other languages in this century, I think, is they deal with philosophical issues. And very few poets writing in English are dealing with personal experience. And so what you get, I think, is a larger philosophical view. And then also you can translate the images. I've been going through a class on Dante this semester, and looking at the translations and stuff. A lot gets lost in translation.
Yeah, but I agree with you. In one sense, if you think of the prophets, Yeah, nothing is lost.
Yeah. So it depends on the poet a lot. Yeah.
Thanks a lot. I
Oh,
enjoyed
sure.
both seminars.
Oh, well, thank you very much. Did you want a few more of these?
I grabbed two.
Oh, you grabbed two.
Yeah.
Okay. Sure. Thank you very much.
Okay.
That's great, you're a character.
You enjoy that? It was different than last time.
Love that.
There she is. I've been reading it.
Oh, Anna. Oh.
Yeah,
Congratulations.
but, yeah, congratulations.
What?
But my assignment this weekend is The Wasteland.
Yeah, see, in Elliot, that's the first one. So that's really, yeah, it's just really hard to grab a hold of. But once you get it, it's simple. But you have to know his background.
I was going to say, but, well, his background, but, I mean, I'm sure that many of these things are referenced by his own life, but I don't know that much about his own life.
And also some of his other poems are a lot easier than that, and that's the most difficult. But see, that's one of the ones I read in that class, and that's why I had to do a lot of study. Yeah, I was reading this Elliot. And it was very, so I didn't know what the hell it was talking about. And so I had to do a lot of research.
Well, all of the references to everything from Ophelia to
Yeah.
Cassandra to whatever.
Right, the more you've read.
Yeah, I mean, you have to have a background. But there's hope for all of us because, I mean, I'm now taking classes once again.
That's
and
great,
what I
yeah.
understand now is a lot different than when I was.
Yeah, I actually,
But I
last
do
time I
a lot
read
of
the Wasteland
traveling.
was a lot different. I did? Yeah.
You're here because you want to be.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
My
Well, I lived in
favorite
the
student-
Lebanon for 7 years.
In the where?
In Lebanon.
Oh,
Beirut.
really?
So I'm very anxious to have it.
Oh, well, Tom should grab you for a lecture then. On Beirut. No? I saw him brighten up when I thought he was going to do it.
Yeah,
The life in.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
life, yeah. But it's a little different because I had 6 children. And,
Six
they
children.
evacuated me and I had to wander all over Europe until they'd allow me back. I managed. But anyway.
Wow, that's a great story. What's your name, by the way?
My name's Patricia Murray.